Well, good morning. I'm Jeff Prosch, Soldier for Life. Welcome to this exciting kickoff panel at the AUSA Installation Hot Topic, where we will be addressing Army installation's role now and in the future. I would like to provide a brief intro to our distinguished panel. You can find a more detailed bio at the website. But first, I'd like to introduce Lieutenant General Bradley Becker, Commander, Installation Management Command. Lieutenant General Becker has over 33 years of Army duty with extensive combat experience, including command of a field artillery battalion in Operation Iraqi Freedom. His recent assignments as commander of Fort Jackson, South Carolina, and the U.S. Military District of Washington make him eminently qualified to command the Army's Installation Management Command and to define the role of IMCOM in the strategic support area in multi-domain operations. Next, I'd like to introduce Major General John Sullivan, Army Assistant Deputy Chief of Staff, Chief 4. Major General Sullivan has over 32 years of Army service and is a top Army transporter and logistician. He commanded Logistics Task Force 548 with the 10th Mountain Division in Iraq and then was the Division G4. He served as 27th Chief of Transportation and Commandant of the Army Transportation School. There's no one more qualified to craft doctrine for strategic power projection from Army facilities. Next, SES Stephen Austin, Assistant Chief of Army Reserve. Mr. Austin serves as the primary advisor to the Chief of Army Reserve, Headquarters Department of the Army. His prior duty is Chief Financial Officer and Director Resource Management and Materiel for the USAR, affecting 198,000 soldiers in 1,500 units and over 1,000 facilities, provides him outstanding experience and qualifications to integrate our USAR soldiers, families, and facilities into the Army strategic support area. Colonel Retired Nello Tortora, Director Federal Programs, Southland Industries. Colonel Tortora is a professional engineer and is responsible for Southland's federal portfolio from customer relations to project development through construction completion. His 27 years of Army service were culminated with command of the Army Corps of Engineers New York District and the Huntsville Center, which is the center of gravity for Army installation acquisition and contracting. During his command at Huntsville, he was a tremendous partner with industry, and the award of Army Energy Efficiency Projects soared. Finally, SES Jordan Gillis, Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Army, Installations, Energy, and Environment. Secretary Gillis was appointed by the White House as Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Army in October 2017. From October 2017 until January 2019, he also served as Acting ASA-IE&E. He has been a very accessible, trusted, and knowledgeable partner with industry. He was commissioned as a field artillery officer and served at Fort Stewart and Al Ramadi, Iraq, where he was awarded the Bronze Star and the Purple Heart. Secretary Gillis has extensive private sector electric utility experience across North America. I now turn the podium over to our esteemed panel chair, Secretary Jordan Gillis.
Thanks, Jeff. See, does that work? All right, good. Good morning. Thanks to AUSA for having us here. Thank you all for attending. I got to tell you, it's great to be back kind of in friendly territory. Many of us were at a conference earlier this week where the other services were present, and I got to tell you, the Army got set up. So Secretary Esper spoke at lunch, and it was great and very well received, but then they gave the Navy the final word without an Army chance to rebut, and the Undersecretary of the Navy said, "Beat Army," and he hustled off the stage. And I was appalled by the whole thing. So it's good to be back. Nothing packs a room, like a theme of Army installations' role in the strategic support area in multi-domain operations. It's a mouthful, and since we're the first panel, I thought I would take a few minutes to try to explain what that means, because I know someone had to do that for me, and I certainly benefited from it. So to lay the cards on the table just a little bit, the doctrine behind multi-domain operations is still under development. So most of what we are using to teach ourselves and to sort of promulgate the ideas so far is a TRADOC pamphlet, 525-3-1. If you want to Google it and get your own copy, that's where you can get some additional insight. If, like me, you're from the era where you remember air-land battle, I'll try to overlay that on multi-domain operations to give you a little insight into where installations fit into that. So you can see that the rear, close, and deep fights still exist, and what multi-domain operations really seeks to do is make more granular the rear and the deep areas. So the support area encompasses really the rear, and you've got support area, operational support area, and strategic support area. Installations are in the strategic support area. We right now are in the strategic support area. So that is the area where we generate the force, deploy the force, train the force. That's where installations carry out their missions. And so when we talk about installations now being in the fight, it's because we're in the strategic support area, and that's part of the concept. We talk about how our mission will be contested even in the strategic support area. That's because we truly now are part of the fight. And so I'll contrast that to some of the grievances that I will now air, is in that installations have long been a bill payer for other Army priorities. And it's probably the right thing to do given the funding levels and the choices that the Army had to make in terms of priorities. But the fact now that we're in the fight, I think elevates the status of installations and gives us a better chance to get those resources that we need, then to be sure that we are equipped and able to support the missions that we carry out. So I won't go too deep into the multi-domain operations picture. I hope that it speaks for itself better than I could speak for it. But when I look at it and think about installations, I ask what are critical and essential for the installations to do. And I'll list a handful of things that I think are the key things. First is the protection of soldiers, families, civilians, unit equipment, and their networks. So that's essential. And a whole host of questions come with that. We're not quite ready to answer all those. You know, one of the ones that just came up was about investment in IT infrastructure and the network. That is a big question that we're grappling with, but the fact that installations are in the strategic support area allows us to sort of have that conversation in a way that is mission-oriented and makes it about readiness. The other thing I think that supports our place in MDO is quality infrastructure. And when I say infrastructure, I really do mean the whole gamut. So barracks, housing, maintenance and operations facilities, power projection platforms, and the network. Most of you know that our facilities are somewhat antiquated, and that's okay. We built them to last for a long time, but they do require investments over a period of time to keep them not only in good shape, but relevant to the mission that we intend for them to carry out. And then finally, Mr. Beeler alluded to this too, soldier and family services that are commensurate with civilian expectations. Now, I don't mean to imply that I think the Army should provide those services, but those services should be provided and should be available to the soldiers and families that live and work on the installations. I think that's a key to recruiting and retaining the force, and it also, as we look for ways to deliver that, whether it's partnering with communities, partnering with industry, that makes our lives easier and helps us deliver what folks expect. So I mentioned that we took some risk with installations. I'll give you a little bit of color to illustrate that. Infrastructure degrades over time, and we have underfunded the facility life cycle. So basic sustainment is a thing that we fund and comes with a life cycle. And we have, I think, arrived at about an $11 billion backlog of deferred maintenance, and our inventory is about 25% in poor or failing condition. We've also failed to adapt installations and facilities to meet the missions that we now want them to carry out. And so we think that there's about a $19 billion deferred modernization bill associated with those. The life cycle, the building life cycle that we anticipate, buildings in the Army are typically built for a 40, 50, maybe even 75-year life cycle before you expect a major capital investment back in the building. But if you look at the investment level that we've had, that would imply that we've built these buildings on a 240-year life cycle, which is not the case. And so that puts General Becker in a tight spot, which I'm sure he would be happy to share with you some of his woes. Installation services, whether it's facilities and infrastructure related or soldier and family services related, they're manpower intensive. But again, with the best intentions, we've sort of cut that staff and really gotten down to the bone with being able to provide services and the oversight that we're supposed to provide. So I think you've seen some of that come home to roost with oversight of our RCI housing partners. We've got a lot of fixes in place to bring that back across the installations and across the infrastructure. So I think it's now that we are acknowledged as part of the fight, that'll put us in a good spot to continue to recover installations to where they need to be. Between that and predictable, adequate, sustained, and timely funding, I think we'll be good. So where do we need to go? I'll remind you what Mr. Beeler teed up again. So it's readiness by 2022, overmatch by 2028, and dominance by 2035. So for us, we focus on our role in that, and that's really the deploy piece. It's what we're here to talk about, is how installations support the mission. We've got a great panel today. Major General Sullivan will discuss the implications of power projection and the needs that MFGI and power projection platforms have. General Becker, he's got a video. I like to do videos, but General Becker's doing the video. And talk about IMCOM's role in installation readiness. Mr. Austin's got the Army Reserve perspective on installations in MDO. And then Colonel Tortora will talk about how industry can help meet the increased challenges that we face. So I hope you be informed by the panel. I look forward to your questions. I'm always informed by those that come from such a well-informed and engaged audience. And I think I will turn it over to General Sullivan.
Mr. Gillis, thank you, and thanks for the invitation to participate and be a part of the panel this morning. I want to just talk for a few minutes about how installation readiness correlates directly with deployment readiness and how we look at our installations as key and integral elements of being able to generate and move combat power from where it is to where it needs to be, as well as the sustainment that must accompany that combat power. So currently, we categorize installations in two overarching categories, one being power projection platforms, and those are essentially installations that have the capacity and capability of deploying up to a brigade size element within a certain amount of time. Then we also have mobilization and force generation installations. Those installations are capable of doing the full gamut of processing units for deployment to include SRP, equipment issue. And so those are two broad categories. There are different distinctions within each of those broad categories. That's really how we're focused right now as an Army as we look at our installations and the role they play in deployment readiness. I want to, the fact that installations play an integral role in deployment readiness should be old news to most in the room. I do, though, want to underscore and perhaps illustrate the point with two recent brigade-sized deployments and how our installations directly contributed to ensuring that those units have what they needed to move from the continental United States to where they were employed overseas on time and with the integral sustainment they needed to do their mission. And so the first, and this is just by way of illustration more than anything, but the 155th Armored Brigade Combat Team out of the Mississippi Army National Guard recently concluded a deployment to Kuwait in support of Operation Spartan Shield. They deployed from July of last year and concluded that deployment March of this year. And as you look at that brigade's deployment, very complex, a lot of moving pieces, but multiple installations had an absolutely integral role in ensuring that they were prepared for the deployment, got to Kuwait in accordance with the combatant commander's required date, and was once arrived, was able to do their mission. So if you look at that brigade's deployment, just as an example, mobilized out of Camp Shelby, Mississippi originally, then moved from Camp Shelby, where they received much of their RFI and personal equipment they needed, to Fort Bliss to do post-mobilization training. From Fort Bliss to Fort Irwin, where they underwent a 45-day NTC rotation, then back to Bliss, equipment shipped out of Gulfport, Mississippi, and the personnel deployed out of the Rapid Deployment Facility at Fort Bliss. Again, multiple installations, all playing distinct yet critical roles in ensuring that that brigade had what it needed to deploy. The equipment was where it needed for both training as well as for movement to theater. And then on the other end, I could illustrate the same thing for you, how they fell in on APS 5 equipment, drew that equipment. So all of those distinct installations having distinct roles but working together to generate that combat power and generate that force for Army Central Command, I think is a good example of, again, the importance of our installations as well as the diverse nature of their respective missions. Another example, more recent, that I'll provide you, 2nd Brigade, 1st Armored Division, recently underwent a emergency deployment readiness exercise. Not the entire brigade, essentially 2 maneuver battalions, a brigade TAC, and some other elements. No notice, as EDREs are. Most of those units were on the range of Fort Bliss when notified, processed through the Rapid Deployment Facility at Fort Bliss, and deployed overseas to Europe, to Poland, in pretty short order. Again, the ability of Fort Bliss, in this example, to rapidly take a unit that is involved in a home station training event, transition that unit through SRP, get it prepared to deploy ADAG operations. All of that relates to the robust deployment infrastructure at that installation. So again, just 2 recent examples. There are many others, but I thought both of those served to underscore the importance of installation readiness and supporting projection of combat power, as well as the importance of investing in the infrastructure at installations like those to ensure we're ready to go do that in the future. And in terms of the future, emergency deployment readiness exercises now are the order of the day. So in this current FY, Army-wide, we've executed 3 EDREs and 1 SEDRE. In FY20, the ante will be upped on that. We currently have 4 EDREs and 2 SEDREs planned in fiscal year 20. That will put additional stress on our installations, the power projection platforms, and the MFGIs to be able to generate that deployment readiness in short order to ensure those units are ready to go. I would highlight as well that Forces Command during FY20 currently has planned 4 mobilization exercises at MFGIs. Again, testing and stressing the systems, the capacity at those installations to provide readiness. Now, I want to turn just briefly, as I look at the clock, to what we're doing to ensure that the infrastructure and the criticality of given the criticality of the infrastructure, how that is invested in going forward. As most in the room, I'm sure know, IMCOM now being assigned under Army Materiel Command allows us some synergy, I would argue, both at the strategic level as well as the installation level, to improving infrastructure investments, making wise investments, and thus promoting our installation's ability to generate and project combat power as needed. So at the strategic level, having the AMC commander now, both the co-chair of the II-PEG as well as the SS-PEG, allows General Perna with the other co-chairs to look across both PEGs and make holistic assessments of where investments need to be made and invest in infrastructure, deployment infrastructure, to better support force projection going forward. I would also argue that if you look locally, if you will, at the installation level, by having IMCOM now aligned under AMC, that also provides better synergies from the LRCs and the garrison commanders as they work together at installations to be able to support deployments like the two examples I gave earlier. So I think steps in the right direction. As we look at the next POM build, there are some clear POM planning tasks that lend themselves toward investments in infrastructure. And I think given the holistic now look, the optimal look we now have across both the II and SSPEG, that will definitely lend to good decisions in terms of investments in infrastructure. One last point on that, when we talk about deployment readiness and our installation's ability to project forces, another key component of that is the supply stockages and installations. And Army Material Command has done a tremendous job working with Forces Command and others to ensure that things as seemingly mundane as blocking, bracing, and tie-down material are at installations in sufficient quantities in order to support future operations. And I could run the gamut through all the classes of supply and speak to that as well. So again, that's in the holistic look at both infrastructure as well as supply stockages. They have to be looked at in tandem. So I will stop there. Apologies for going a little over time. And General Becker, I will turn it over to you.
Great. Instead of just reading all the things that IMCOM does and has been doing for years in support of senior commanders regarding installation readiness, I would like to tee up a quick video because a picture's worth 1,000 words, and the chief says it better than I do.
United States Army Installation Management Command. We are the Army's home, serving the rugged professional. Army readiness begins at our installations through the efforts of IMCOM professionals.
So the 50,000 soldiers and civilians of IMCOM spread out in 80 installations around the world are doing critical tasks, and they are the ones that are responsible for the readiness of today's Army and preparing for the readiness of tomorrow's Army. They are foundational to our success.
The lethality of tomorrow's Army is generated on our installations.
IMCOM is responsible for the mobilization of those forces. They're responsible for maintaining the deployment platforms of those forces. They maintain all the training facilities for those forces, and so on and so forth. There's not a single unit in Forces Command who can get off Jump Street without the efforts of IMCOM.
IMCOM focuses resources and attention to improve infrastructure, build a protection mindset, support training, and deliver programs and services to build the resiliency of our soldiers and the self-reliance of our families so they can meet the unique demands of Army life.
Every single one of us in uniform and every single one of our families are touched by IMCOM.
IMCOM provides the Army and our nation with power projection platforms that generate ready and resilient troops with the operational agility to respond to the full spectrum of contingency operations from support to the homeland to high-intensity combat. IMCOM works with public and private partners to create and employ efficient programs and services on our installations. And by doing so, is creating strong military communities that support one another today and will care for families in the future when our soldiers are deployed. IMCOM executes its mission so soldiers can focus on the current and future fights because they know IMCOM is taking care of their families at home. We are a dedicated global workforce working together to support Army senior commanders and their warfighters in meeting today's challenges and preparing for future opportunities. U.S. Army Installation Management Command. We are the Army's home, serving the rugged professional.
Okay, I just want to do that. We put that video together not for this panel, but in some ways just to remind our folks within IMCOM, as Mr. Beeler stated, that our installations are not just where we go to work every day. Our installations really are where the Army builds readiness and from where we project power, and that's why we exist. That's why IMCOM exists, is to enable Army readiness. As you all are aware, the Secretary initiated a number of reform initiatives last fall, and the first one we really took on was installation management. And as part of that, Army Material Command became the higher headquarters for Installation Management Command. We are now an MSC. And as was pointed out just recently, I think that better postures the Army to synchronize all efforts within the strategic support area as part of multi-domain operations. I'm going to highlight just very briefly how we're doing this, how AMC is doing this, synchronizing the efforts within the strategic support area. They're doing it through 7 strategic focus areas under one 4-star commander. It's installation readiness, which IMCOM has the lead for, soldier and family readiness, again, which IMCOM has the lead for, strategic power projection, which we play a large role in, industrial base readiness, which we play a role in as far as the facilities are concerned, munitions readiness, supply availability and equipment readiness, and logistics information readiness. And through those strategic focus areas under one four-star commander, we're able to synchronize all activities within the strategic support area, again, for the Army. For the sake of time, I'm not going to talk about all those strategic focus areas, but I would highlight just a couple real quick because I've got about a minute left. The first is installation readiness. And what we're trying to accomplish, our output for installation readiness, are installations that are capable of supporting current and evolving Army readiness. And current readiness we define through the GIF map and combatant command O-plan requirements. And for our evolving readiness, we're looking at where we're going with our CFTs and with Army modernization, what our maintenance facilities, what our training ranges, what our range operations are going to have to do in the future to support that readiness. The other, I think, key aspect, in addition to just bringing together the II and SS PEG, is having a four-star commander that can now help us come up with a comprehensive facility investment strategy, something that we've had investment strategies for restoration and modernization, we've had funding levels for sustainment, we've worked MILCOM, but we've not had a comprehensive strategy, facilities investment strategy that brought together sustainment, restoration and modernization, demo, and MILCON, and we're working that now under General Perna's leadership. The second area is soldier and family readiness. And again, our output here are resilient soldiers and families that are prepared for the unique challenges of military life and deployments. So that means that we're going to do things other than specific to readiness, like our CDCs, our Child Development Centers, and Child Youth Services programs, which are critical to the readiness of our Army, critical to taking care of soldiers and families, both in preparation for deployment and while they're deployed, as well as our financial readiness programs, FMWR, and our fitness and programs as well. So I'm just going over time here. I'll just again remind everybody, we exist, MCOM exists to enable readiness. That's why we're here. But I've heard the Vice say on several occasions just recently that if the Army is to maintain an all-volunteer force in the future, we've got to do three things well: child care, housing, and health care. And MCOM plays a critical role in two of those three things in maintaining that all-volunteer force. So with that, I will turn it over to our next panel member.
Who's on deck next? Everybody's fighting for it?
Army Reserves.
Okay, so Steve Austin, Carter, thank you, and the AUSA team for putting this together. Actually, so one comment referenced the Secretary yesterday. I was on a Defense Communities panel with Martha McSally, so an Air Force Academy grad, and Jimmy Panetta, Navy guy. So I did get in the beat Air Force and the beat Navy. So they didn't appreciate it, but and one thing to add to Jeff, you know, who I am, you know, because I'm not wearing, I did spend 27 years active, so I am an engineer. I'm a professional engineer. I'm a combat engineer. I can't hear worth of crap, which may be to my advantage sometimes. But I certainly understand the installation and the community perspective. I spent 9 years, almost 9 years in Germany, 3 years in Korea, all over. So, but what I want to present, the main message is, so the active component, we think in terms of installations. But on the reserve side, both the Army Reserve and the Guard, we are community-based. So Jeff mentioned roughly 1,000 reserve centers and facilities out throughout the community. That is where we are based. And the soldiers come in, so they're doing generally 1 weekend a month, plus minus, and they're doing home station training at those defense centers. So that is, there's a different operational model. And I'll be the first to admit, because all my time is active, that we really don't fully appreciate that unless you've lived this. And actually, there's a couple, Brian, you know, former reserve, Army Reserve G3s who understand, but they've been educated. And and that's the main thing. So part of our focus is with the generally operating from a reserve center, so we are heavily into training simulators. For instance, I'll give you one example, an IMSAR. It's a training range. It's a portable, semi-portable. I mean, you have to build some stuff for it, but we put up an IMSAR and it's indoor. We put it in American Samoa because we have a company from the 100th of the 4-4 Deuce Infantry down there. And before that, they had to go to Hawaii to do weapons training, to do their qualifications. Now that we have this there, then they don't have to, I mean, you think about it wasn't cheap, but, you know, over the life cycle, it's a huge savings. And the other thing is we partner with our, like, local police, local government. So the American Samoa Police Force, I don't know where that, because before this time, there were no ranges on American Samoa. They could not fire a weapon there. So maybe they went to Guam or I'm not sure, but now we have a partnership with the police force so they can use our facility there. EST 3000, so those are ranges actually they're 2 large suitcases. We bought about 100 of those and they're scattered around so you can set them up in a facility like this and do range training. Rich, the rough terrain forklift, you know, simulators like that. So that is one of the focus areas of the Army Reserve is on the training simulators. So that's the home station. We also have 6 installations: Fort Buchanan, Fort McCoy, Fort Hunter Liggett. So we use those. We also use the active installations. But again, a weekend force, so we have to coordinate with the installations in order to get training ranges and facilities open on weekends, which is not typically the norm. So that's part of the issue. The last thing I would leave you with, and CTCs, the Army Reserve, and the Guards, the same boat. So far in FY19, we've had about 6,600 Army Reserve soldiers that have rotated through the CTCs. So we are plugged in. We do exercises. The car went up to Maple Resolve up in Fort Wainwright in Canada. You have the 9th MSC in Hawaii and the Pacific. You're the 7th MSC in USER. They do all the training out there. So we're plugged in all the way from major exercises, but on the other end, and I keep reinforcing this, and I apologize, but you know, we oftentimes don't get it. They're a weekend a month, the home station based, community based, and the next installation may be where I grew up, Eastern Oregon. Hell, it's 8 hours probably to JBLM, and you know, I don't. So if you're in the middle of Montana or the middle of Wyoming, where do you go? So you're very limited. The last thing I would leave you with is not installation focused, but it's part of it. Our reserve soldiers and our guard soldiers, it's a balance. So we want them to be as ready as possible. And Ready Force X, the Army Reserve, we have 30,000 soldiers that got to go out in the first 60 days now based upon multi-domain operations. And actually, we have units just based upon the way the Army is structured that go out in days, you know, port opening units, those type of things. So a reserve soldier, they have to have a balance. We want them as ready as possible, but we don't want them so ready, taking so much time for the Army that they have to sacrifice their civilian jobs and families, because that's the balance. And maybe some of you live this. I've never lived this. I've had one job at one time my whole life, but these guys are balancing 2 jobs. So We want them as ready as possible, but we don't want them so ready that they sacrifice on the other end. Family, job, giving up their jobs, so it's a balance.
Good morning, and thank you, Secretary Gillis, for including me on this panel to give the industry perspective on this important topic. And I really just want to provide just a few observations and one brief example from industry perspective. And first, I have to concur with Secretary Gillis regarding what we see on a lot of Army installations as we go out and try to help the Army improve energy efficiency and resiliency on their installations. We do see the significant backlogs of deferred maintenance for facilities, not enough operations and maintenance resources, and those state-of-the-art systems that are needed to address maintenance and repair proactively versus reactively, and definitely a lack of resilience required in critical mission facilities. Lots of good energy infrastructure work that has been performed, but it's often performed piecemeal and not completed through a holistic approach, which results in a limited impact to overall resiliency at that installation. And overall, this leads to obviously a negative impact on the ability for installations to conduct their mission and on the soldiers, families, and civilians who live and work there on the installation every day. One positive note. The DPWs, the directors of public works, and the staff, facility staff, are doing a tremendous job trying to accomplish their mission, and probably the reason that the Army has been able to take risk on installations for quite some time. So I want to touch a bit on resilience and funding for resilience. First, I would say that there are a lot of priorities and requirements for installation, specifically with regard to achieving resiliency, and these priorities are definitely challenged to find funding streams so they can be realized. Broadly, you have an executive order from May of 2018 that requires continued reduction annually in building energy use and reduction in both potable and non-potable water consumption. From an industry perspective, this requirement works hand in hand with resiliency goals in that it's the first step in a cost-effective approach to right-size the critical energy loads on installations. More specifically, the directives from the Army's pivot to resiliency, one that requires installations to secure critical missions during disruptions to supply by being capable of providing necessary energy and water for a minimum of 14 days. So that's just one example. And finding funding to achieve these and other requirements from our perspective has been very difficult for installations. I would like to promote a funding stream that the Army has already successfully used, and it's funding that really requires no additional appropriation, and one that I believe can help achieve the resilience required for critical missions on installations. The Army has in the past used third-party financing to fund infrastructure improvements through the use of energy savings performance contracts. And this is a contract where the private sector can bring funding, and that funding is used to develop and implement energy savings measures on an installation to pay for infrastructure improvements and resilience. These savings in performance of all the new infrastructure is guaranteed for the term of the contract up to 25 years. So just some rough numbers on how the Army has used third-party financing for these types of performance contract. The Army has used almost $3 billion in third-party financing that's resulted in approximately $7 billion in savings to the Army. So if we can do more of this, we can tackle more of the $11 billion backlog of deferred maintenance and enhance resilience of critical mission facilities, while the risk of the performance and the guaranteed savings are assumed by industry in the execution of the contract. The challenge, of course, is that resiliency is expensive to implement, and the ability to generate enough energy savings to pay for required resiliency is often difficult, although there are numerous examples where this has been accomplished, particularly when paired with significant efficiency improvements. So lastly, it is possible to leverage some appropriated funding within a performance contract to generate enough additional savings to pay for resilient features such as on-site power generation and microgrids, which are needed to ensure resiliency on installations. So we need to be innovative in the way we use our various funding streams to maximize our resiliency acquisition for the least amount of expenditure. Industry looks forward to partnering with the Army to continue to do that. One really quick example, Fort Riley, Kansas. We're on the third phase of a $70 million in capital infrastructure improvements, everything from HVAC to boilers to airfield lighting to interior lighting, exterior lighting. What's important also about that is we mentioned cybersecurity. Fort Riley was able to make a $500,000 investment with that contract. And as we were, in fact, upgrading and expanding all of their energy management control systems, we were able to use that $500,000 to achieve the authority to operate and the required cybersecurity, so that now they have a resilient system that they can actually use to manage energy and be more proactive in their operations and maintenance. So those are my brief observations, and I thank you for the opportunity to be here today. Thanks very much.
So now's the part of the panel where we turn to questions, and we'll endeavor to answer them, hopefully to your satisfaction. We had a couple teed up as softballs that we could ask ourselves. So I'll start with one of those, and then we'll go to the stack of questions that we received from the audience. So the first one is for General Becker and General Sullivan, and it is: can you explain the impact of MCOM being a subordinate command of AMC tied to power projection and platforms and readiness? So how has MCOM's move to AMC changed the way MCOM supports power projection and readiness?
So I'll address this in two respects. And I mentioned it briefly in my remarks. At kind of the Army level, strategic level, having the AMC commanding general now co-chair both the IIPEG and the SSPEG allows him, with the other co-chairs and the entire team, to look across both portfolios holistically to make sound decisions with respect to where we're investing in any number of things, but one of those being deployment infrastructure. And so I think that lends itself to, again, that holistic look in achieving economies where they're to be achieved and making wise investment decisions. I would also submit, and I'll defer completely to General Becker on this because this is his command, and as a member of the Army staff, I have observations, but that's perhaps they're not as tied in with things on the ground. But I would submit that having formalization of MCOM under AMC also lends at the local level to having better synergy and unity of effort between the LRCs and the garrison commanders and the senior mission commanders. Again, look through the lens of deployment readiness or force projection, allowing that holistic look, unity of effort, not to suggest it wasn't there before, but it lends to it and sets the conditions for it to occur at a higher level, I would argue.
Yeah, and I would concur on, again, the power, having the IIPEG and the SSPEG aligned and having the AMC strategic focus areas that gets at power projection with MCOM as part of that equation really brings synergy to the equation. Getting to the LRC, and this is a little off the topic of that question, but you brought it up twice. I think it's a great point. You know, as a senior commander, we had kind of a misalignment across our installations of responsibilities and authorities at the garrison level. So garrison commanders were responsible for synchronizing. They were responsible for synchronizing all efforts on that installation, to include your CPAC, your LRC, your MIC, your NEC, but they didn't have the authority. They only had the authority over Garrison, Garrison assigned, MCOM assigned functions. Now, we've been making great strides with the LRCs. General Gamble's been working with MCOM for quite some time to bring some synergy to the LRCs and the garrisons. But I think in the near future, without getting ahead of the boss's headlights, but certainly as MCOM has become a major subordinate command under AMC, I think we'll see a better alignment. We will see an alignment of the responsibilities and authorities at Garrison. That will start with the mix and the LRCs, but I think we'll expand that out to eventually to the CPACs and the NECs as well. And again, that would not happen under if MCOM were still a direct report unit to Chief of Staff of the Army. And General Dahl was kind of the leading, working with General Perna, was kind of the leading advocate to say, hey, look, MCOM needs a 4-star commander. The chief's just too busy to get wrapped up in day-to-day business of installation management. And as great a relationship as General Dahl had with the chief and the senior Army leadership, he didn't have a seat at the table. The MCOM commander does not have a seat at the table, but General Perna always has a seat at the table and a direct line. So we have seen a tremendous number of benefits just in the first several months of this relationship, where General Perna has been able to move things forward that if I were still working them or General Dahl were still working them, would still be fighting for those resources, would still be pushing it through the staff, but having a 4-star commander. So there are tremendous benefits beyond just the power projection MFGI piece that we're going to make improvements in.
Before we go to the next, wait, this is on the record and for attribution? All right, what the hell? So when we talk about the value of aligning the II and SS PEG, really multi-domain operations, it kind of helps you see that, because those are both of the funding sources or the dollars that really support the strategic support area. So you got a great alignment then of dollars and doctrine. And so on the uniform side, perfect alignment under AMC, who co-chairs both of those pegs. I might suggest among friends that there could be some value in making there be secretariat, Army Secretariat alignment that mirrors that. So that's something that we may look at. May not get any traction whatsoever with Army senior leaders, but I think that would be a nice parallel from the Secretariat side and then from the Army staff side.
Okay, how about a question from the audience here? First question: cities and communities share the battle space with the installations they support. You on the panel, how are you training garrison commanders and the staff to interface with their local communities on issues of services, continuity of operations, and more importantly, resilience?
That's a great question. So as part of the pre-command course for all of our garrison commanders, we do include a community piece, and their responsibility as the senior commander's representative to interface with the community. We've looked at, as the Army has rightfully focused on fighting wars and now moving into modernization to prepare for the next, installations have been a bill payer, as you heard. And so we've tried to be innovative without reducing soldier and family programs, but reforming how we do them and looking at youth sports and other things that the community can do, some of what we call our Category B activities, arts and crafts, auto craft shops. What can we do? What services are we providing that we could be partnering with our communities outside the gate to provide our soldiers and family members so they still have that service, but it's not necessarily provided by us. So we worked that very, very hard. In fact, I just left this morning the Association of Defense Communities, which is meeting in Washington, D.C. for one of their big meetings. We were talking Healthy Army Communities and the Healthy Base Initiative, but I spent a lot of time, and our garrison commander spent a lot of time with the Association of Defense Communities, looking how we could better partner. Another area we're looking at with the communities that also brings the community in as we look at our installations, as power projection platforms and where our families will live and reside as we deploy, is intergovernmental support agreements, where we take a service that we were being provided a lot of times with small business contracts or Ability One contracts, and saying to the city of Leesville and say, hey, you do grounds maintenance, you do custodial service, you do pest management. Can we just be part of your contract? And we went from a $29 million contract to a $19 million. That's one installation, small installation, Fort Polk, not a big one. $10 million a year just on one base ops. So as we expand our intergovernmental support agreements with the local communities, it also brings the community onto the installation and, creates jobs for them. But it strengthens our partnership with the community. So that is a critical part. And for the garrison commanders, that starts at the pre-command course. I know there's a lot of concern with our senior leadership about, garrison commanders come from all different branches. They're eminently qualified to be garrison commanders or to be 06's commanders as far as their branch experience, but there's not a lot that prepared them to be garrison commanders. But I would highlight all of our deputy garrison commanders, our GS-15s, most are former garrison commanders. They have a wealth of garrison experience. So even though we have new garrison commanders trying to learn that community and what all I do as far as, oversight of privatized housing, as far as, working with the local community, we've got very experienced deputy garrison commanders for a reason that we have civilians in there for that continuity.
So I would add the reserve component piece to that. And Brad's right. It's relationships, it's partnerships. So actually, same thing. I was talking yesterday at the ADC. We tell our commanders from company command, battalion command, that they have to get out and they need to be talking and building a relationship with their local partners, be they government or private. We have a public-private partnership office that facilitates a lot of that. That's also hiring, because a lot of Army Reserve soldiers and Guard soldiers are in the government, local government, in private companies there, so that interaction is already there. But it's relationships, and it's same thing with military. They rotate out every 2 or 3 years, and on the private side, the local government side, same thing. So it's a constant, but it's relationships. And sometimes, and actually, Brad's right, we're doing the same thing. Grass cutting, is there an opportunity where we can have some partnership with the local community, and we don't even need to do a contract, or we tap into their contract, or, whatever the opportunities. My last point would be DSCA. Defense Support to Civil Authorities. So this is response to natural disasters, things like that. And it goes back to relationships, because based upon NDAA 12, Section 12304 Alpha, and yeah, it's indelibly printed in my brain, immediate response authority. So local commanders have the ability, if something happens, and we've seen it throughout the country, and I'm speaking from an Army Reserve perspective, West Virginia, a couple of years ago, flooding. The mayor talked to the company commander there at the Reserve Center, and they were using trucks and rafts and that type of thing to move civilians out of harm's way. So that's part of it. I mean, it's a two-way street, and it's relationships and partnerships.
So, if I could just ask a question associated with this. Can an installation, what I mean by that is, let's say you have critical infrastructure, you're a power projection platform, and let's say 2 substations get taken out. One in the community, one that supports an installation. And you're in the middle of the MOB, or you have critical infrastructure, some critical capability that's on the installation. Can the military, and specifically can the Army or the garrison, impose their will on the local community and say that substation will come back up before your substation? Or can you can you go into some sort of negotiation beforehand? Is there a policy or a law that allows the installation to actually assume a priority in those situations?
I'll just keep the conversation going. And I'm sure there are as many examples of where it might be problematic or doesn't work. But when I was at SMDC in April of 2011, we had a tornado, took out a great part of the community and brought power down on Redstone and across the Huntsville-Madison County area. And I'm not sure how much this was prepared, thought through, planned, and just implemented, or if it was just smart people on the ground working it out. And I never found out, I never really asked, but just watching how the community and the garrison came together and brought power up in an organized way that balanced the need of community emergency services, hospitals, and all of the critical military activities and NASA that exist on that installation. It was really worked out well. It's a case study for how to do that well, and I would encourage us to look at it.
Yeah, I mean, short answer to your point, there's no law or policy that I'm aware of, but as Mr. Formica pointed out, or General Formica pointed out, that was the same experience I had as a former commander at Fort Jackson. When we had a power outage, we worked with the community. We established what were the most important things that needed to come up, both on the installation, because we were providing a lot of support to the community during that flooding, and we would just work together to bring it up. But it wasn't driven by policy or law that we could just say, we'll take that.
Just for the record, from a policy standpoint, we like to partner and collaborate more than we like to impose our will. So that's and that approach is frankly works pretty well. And on an installation by installation basis, those community partnerships, whether it's with utility provider, or other means that we have redundant power sources, we're in generally good shape. Like General Formica gave an example, and there are others where we've got resilience that is not at the expense of the community.
I guess my question is one about a terrorist, and we're talking about resiliency and multi-domain operations, right? So if somebody goes and poisons water or releases a chemical agent, and so now you have the community that's suffering from a released chemical agent, and let's take Fort Bragg. It's a power projection platform. It's in the middle of a MOB. What can we do, or is there anything to do, do we have anything to lean on so that we can say, this is a tough call, but we need to keep the power projection platform open. Here's FORSCOM, here's, USASOC. They need to be operating and running, and so sad, so bad. I mean, I think it's a tough call. But if this is the conversation we're having, I think we got to address it.
We have another comment.
I think we're really scratching an important itch here, in that as a longtime city manager, the intergarrison support agreements were really the first step in terms of looking at commonality of community services. But I think the next level needs to be including the cities and the communities that are supporting the installation in the planning for that next battle. Because sometimes the relationships work, as was demonstrated at Huntsville. But very often, if the cities have not been exercised, if the cities don't truly understand the needs of the mission, they will react to other political forces just because they're there and they know that they're there. So my question associated with the training of garrison commanders was really to go a little bit higher level in terms of including your communities in your planning and in your doctrine for resilience.
No, that's a great point. And one of the things I talk, and this is both at the pre-command course for our garrison commanders as well as the senior commander course, is including your community leadership in your installation planning boards, because that's where we look at what the priorities are, what the needs are of our installations going forward over the next several years. And that was something that was lacking. We've done a pretty good job of including all of our tenant units from other services, other federal agencies in our installation planning boards, but except in a few cases, I know Fort Stewart did a great job doing this, we weren't necessarily including the community leadership, the mayor and the city council folks, to look at what as we do our installation planning board, what the needs of the Army are going to be. But to take that one step further, to your point, would be, as we look at our full-scale exercises that we do at each one of our installations, where it could be a terrorist attack, it could be any of these scenarios you just discussed, is how we include our community. We include the community law enforcement. They're almost always involved. We all have mutual aid agreements with our law enforcement agencies, but including the city leadership would be helpful as well. So they think about, if we had to prioritize things, how would we prioritize based on this scenario? So that's something, again, I think on the installation planning board, we're getting there, but regarding the full-scale exercise, that's something I probably need to talk to our folks about.
Lieutenant General Becker, how can facilities infrastructure conditions be measured in readiness ratings similar to a unit status readiness and its effect on units' ability to train, maintain, and operate to prepare for deployment?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. So, we talk about, installations being the IIPEG being kind of the bill payer for a number of years for all the right reasons. But it's even more challenging than that when we start talking about infrastructure, because within the IIPEG, some of our biggest dollars are in our sustainment, our restoration, and our modernization. And so every time we want to reduce some other program that, a congressman or a family member or somebody else is very fond of, we're told no. So at the end of the day, over the years, we always ended up taking our money out of sustainment, restoration, and modernization. Why is housing the way it is? Not just with privatized. Why are barracks in the condition they're in? Because that's where we took the money. Because, Private Becker didn't have as big a voice as somebody who was writing their congressman or protecting some program that they thought was absolutely critical on that installation. So what we are doing, I mean, we do have ISR ratings both for quality, for functionality, for across the board, and we can tell you whether a facility is failing, poor failing, good condition. But what we can't do right now is we can't show the senior leadership, if you fund sustainment at this level, then over the next 10 years here, and we prioritize, let's say, we fund at this level 80% sustainment, and we prioritize maintenance facilities, airfields, training facilities, barracks, right on down. Here's what Fort Hood would look like, or here's what the entire Army would look like 10 years from now. The Air Force has got a pretty good program now through Builder, and then there's Builder loads all the data. So it'll take a building built in this year, and it takes all the components of that building. It'll tell you when your HVAC's going to fail, when your electrical system's going to fail, when your water, depending on what type it is and when it was built. So it takes all the components of that facility, and then you can plug into this, not to Builder, but to this other program that they've got. If I fund at this level over time, what can I expect? It's kind of like changing the oil in your car. Everybody knows if you don't change your oil in your car, at some point your engine will fail. It will. But is that 5 years from now? Is that 10 years from now? Is that 15 years from now? I don't know. I just know that I got to change my oil periodically. And if I don't, the engine will not last as long. And it's the same with our facilities. Our leadership know that. But we can't show them right now exactly what that will do to our ability to push a brigade out of Fort Bragg 5 years from now. And that's where we're trying to go with Builder. We're accelerating. We've asked for about, I think, $20 million in 19, another $69 million in 20 to accelerate having Builder online by FY21. I think that's what we're committed to. And once we have Builder online, then we can, and we get everything loaded, then we can show our leadership kind of the rheostats of what will happen at different levels of funding for sustainment, restoration, modernization, based on the prioritization of the facilities that we're gonna focus on.
So I'll just add one quick thing to that, which is that, the best tool and the best modeling, if it spits out that we have a $90 billion bill to pay, we're still going to have to do some serious prioritization to figure out, because we're not going to get funding to that level. Say we get to a point where there's sequestration or Budget Control Act levels of funding, installations in the strategic support area, and the best visibility on our infrastructure status, won't matter. So we all have to continue to to beat the drum for the right kind of funding levels for the Army at large so that we can get after all the Army priorities. You know, at the end of the day, if there's a choice between long-range precision fires and infrastructure funding, something related to readiness and warfighting is going to win and has to win. So really there's a larger conversation about overall Army top line that we need to continue to have to be sure that installations are beneficiaries of that.
Question for Colonel Tortora. From an industry perspective, is the Army doing much with solar energy, such as street lighting?
Yes.
Is the Army doing enough with renewable energy now that we've focused on resilience versus renewable?
So even though we're more focused on resilience now, renewable is part of that in terms of types of different ways you can achieve resilience do include solar, photovoltaic, and they can include other sources of renewable power as well. So one of the, it's not a renewable technology, but combined heat and power cogeneration are also ways to achieve resilience, and it's something that the Army is strongly supporting. And so we're evaluating that on every installation that we're allowed to come out to. We will evaluate that and give a recommendation on whether it's feasible or not.
Question for Mr. Gillis and General Becker. Do you believe the National Defense Authorization Act and DoD policy gives you enough authority to implement a viable, resilient strategy and implement such things as renewables, physical infrastructure protection, et cetera?
Yeah, I think so. I think that there are folks with interests who would like to see specific language in the NDAA then that drives the Army, to reach X goal or use this kind of technology. And I understand that, but, frankly, the less specific guidance we have in law is better for us and gives us kind of flexibility to adapt to different funding levels and different technologies that may emerge or present themselves. So I would not ask for additional legislation that pointed me in specific directions.
I would concur completely. I think we have what we need and don't want any more specific guidance. And sometimes there are challenges with regards to this that we want some flexibility. And as the organization that is year of execution and implementer of policy, we see like at Fort Drum where we've gone to this resiliency contract for electricity using wood chips. And the way the contract was written, and it's a long-term contract over the next 30 years, we're going to pay $100 million more above the electricity we'd be paying off the grid to be able to produce electricity using wood chips. So it's not always a good thing. I mean, it's nice to have resiliency, but it's not always a good thing, especially if we are locked in and we don't have the flexibility to go back and say, you know what? We didn't. This didn't work out very well, and it's debatable. The company that we're working with says it's $77 million. We think it's going to be about $100 million or $112 million above the grid. They acknowledge it's significantly more expensive than electricity off the grid, which is readily available. It's not that we need the wood chips to be able to produce. So there are challenges in this when we get too specific of guidance.
A question to the panel. Two immediate potential threats to the installations are cyber attacks and unmanned aerial system attacks. Some garrisons are working with industry partners and civic leaders to try to create a solution set. Is the enterprise looking at material solutions to protect against these two threats?
Yes, the G357's got the lead. I just sat through the UAV working group discussing the priority for installations, and right now it's very targeted at specific installations, and even on those installations at specific capabilities on those installations. But as that grows, that's an enterprise approach for all of the Army. We will field those capabilities based on where we are currently going to protect from UAVs. It will not be an IMCOM DES lead because those organizations, those capabilities have their own security, even though they're within the larger footprint of the installation. But as we expand and those become available for the entire installation, whether it's a Fort Bragg or a Fort Hood, then I do see that would be a senior commander, obviously responsibility, but it would be that garrison commander and their director of emergency services that takes the lead for that. Regarding the cyber, again, we don't have the lead for that, but I will tell you IMCOM has got major challenges regarding our ability to protect from cyber attacks because it's not just our computer systems that have to be FISMA compliant. Every single one of our buildings that has an environmental control system is tied to the network, and it's vulnerable. So we have got a concerted effort going on led by Major General Tim McGuire to get IMCOM up to being FISMA compliant. That's just step one. And we are nowhere near. We are again, our computer systems, all of our ATOs are up, our authorities to operate are up to speed. Everyone's been trained, but for us to become FISMA compliant with all of the different systems that are on an installation that tie into the network, we've got a long ways to go. So that's our effort right now, is just becoming FISMA compliant, step one.
Mr. Austin, how resilient are USAR facilities? And if local power is lost, are the reserve centers considered a priority?
I would say it's a mixed bag out there. Some are more resilient than others, and it goes back to Jordan's comment about how much money do we have and how much is available. For training, we do pre-mobilization training at reserve centers, but that's not, if a unit is going to punch out, they're going to go to the MFGI, the Mobilization Fourth Generation installation. So I don't have a good answer. I mean, we recognize we have here's what we need, and it also goes to unmanned aerial vehicles and cyber and all of that. We don't have as much of an issue on cyber because we're not tied in, but there are a lot of requirements out there, and we've addressed some of them, and it is based upon priorities, but we certainly cannot address all of them. So I know, waffly answer, but, we're just not there.
Major General Sullivan, can you prioritize the capabilities for which you most need help from industry to promote readiness?
So I can't speak to one specific capability in terms of specific technology. I would say that anything that lends toward accelerating the process by which we deploy units, both equipment and personnel, and that may be self-evident, but also any technology that helps us be more precise in that. For example, we have implemented at some installations weigh-in-motion scales in order to correctly ascertain the weight and of the vehicles that are deploying, and that feeds into our automated systems and helps populate those. We are finding that is far more expeditious and far more precise than other methods we have been using. So we're doing I hesitate to use the term proof of principle because it is so ubiquitous, but a proof of principle later this summer with a deploying unit to compare the weigh-in-motion technology versus other methods of doing it and comparing that. And I think based on the results of that, we may expand that. That's one very small example, and I'm not suggesting that weigh-in-motion technology is like cutting-edge technology, but it is anything that lends toward rapidly generating the movement of combat power, whether it be equipment or personnel, would be that'd be something that we'd be interested in. So general answer, no specifics though.
Lieutenant General Becker, are there any efforts to modernize installation police and security forces to enhance their role in support of multi-dimension operations?
The short answer, as far as modernizing our police and law enforcement, is no. That I'm aware of. There's no Army efforts to modernize those. We have looked at modernizing our installation access, and we're working with a capability called AIE that's currently at some of our installations that would modernize our ability to get people on the post, as well as provide extra layers of security based on the checks that it does on the people that are entering our installations. But as far as our police force, in fact, in a lot of cases, what we're seeing is reduced number of military police on our installations. And I think some of that's because as we look at our threats, the biggest threats that we're looking against are cyber threats, potentially future UAV threats. So there has been no move. In fact, in the last, not as the IMCOM commander, but as a former senior commander, we've continually lost MP units on our installations. And I think there's another future effort that would move some of our MPs to other places as well. So nothing to modernize or increase our military police or law enforcement forces on our installations.
Okay, in the last 5 minutes, I will ask the panel, starting with Colonel Tortora and ending with Secretary Gillis, to tell us in 1 minute or less the most important thing that keeps you up at night and how you think you ought to solve it and not have any nightmares but have good sleep pattern.
I've been sleeping pretty well lately. I can't tell you that. If I had 1 minute to make a closing remark, can I do that? Okay, thank you, sir. I do want to encourage the panel and everybody in the audience to, as much as possible, the way I see industry can help is for you all to engage industry in as many forms as possible, down to commander, garrison commander, and directors of public works. I think when that happens, it's possible to generate a lot of great ideas and possibly solutions to a lot of the installation problems around resiliency and efficiency. And then last, I want to strongly encourage attendance. The best forum for the Army and all the federal agencies is the Energy Exchange, which is run by the Department of Energy. I know Secretary Gillis will be there. It's really a great forum for DPWs and energy managers and operations managers, facility managers. There's over 100 different training sessions that will go on there, and a great opportunity for industry and government to interact. Thank you.
So likewise, nothing that specifically is keeping me up at night, but one thing that I think we collectively as an enterprise need to continue trying to see ourselves better and refine that picture is with respect to deployment readiness. When we talk about, well, the examples I gave, for example, the 155th ABCT and 21 AD, those are important in terms of the ability for installations to generate the capacity and capability needed to move them. But in isolation, they're not indicative of what it would be at scale. So to be able to look at all the MFGIs and power projection platforms, and were we to have to exercise those at scale, what would that look like? What would the friction points be? And what investments do we need to make today to ensure in the event we go to scale that we're ready to do so and being able to project the combat power and sustainment we need to in order to support operations?
So I'll go to some general comments. Number one, balance. So that keeps me up. The Army Reserve soldier has 39 days, typically funded a year. We ask them, generally they're doing 60 plus right now, just based upon requirements. So, are we asking too much of them? We have to, again, balance between being ready enough so they don't go somewhere and get killed, but not so ready that they're giving up their, day job, because that also helps them. It helps the Army, the partnerships out there. Another thing that keeps me up, and I'm totally off the subject, and we talked about it yesterday, was the separation of the military and particularly the Army from society. We become more and more, insulated in installations, and we have to reach out. And part of that is the reserve and the Guard, because they are the ones that are out there in the community. And last one, so this doesn't keep me up, but InStrength does. You all are recruiters. You've heard that before. You are all recruiters. So, and again, that goes back to connection to the American people.
All right, I'll just close very quickly. Thanks, General Ham, for hosting this and putting this together. It not necessarily keeps me up at night, but my biggest concern is that when we make informed recommendations to our senior leadership, we work with senior commanders, we work with the ACOMs, ASCCs in areas where we think we can reform or make reductions, and then the senior leadership agrees with those because they are informed, and again, senior commanders have input, and they know their installations better than anybody else, working with their garrison commanders, and then other forces get involved. And I'm not so naive not to realize that there aren't politics involved in everything we do in Washington, D.C., but then those decisions are overturned, and at the end of the day, we end up taking money out of sustainment, restoration, modernization, and our facilities just continue to fail and fail and fail. So I think that's my biggest concern, is that, I think our senior commanders are well informed, our garrison commanders are well informed, and we've had some very solid recommendations on where we could save the Army some money and reinvest that money. It's not just to save money, it's to reinvest that money to where we need it, and that's in our facilities. And it just continuously, I say continuously, but too often that money ends up getting diverted, and then we end up taking it out of our facilities.
All right, so breaks next. I've had 2 cups of coffee and a bottle of water since the last break, so I'll try to be brief. Thanks to AUSA and thanks to all the panel members for being here. This was great. As I suspected, I learned a lot about what's on folks' minds. We talked a lot about partnerships, about resilience, about readiness, and about security. And so that gives me a lot to go back and chew on. And I hope that you got a little flavor for what we mean and kind of take for granted now when we talk about the strategic support area and multi-domain operations. So hopefully that is less abstract to you now than it was earlier this morning. But to answer Mr. Prosch's question, about what keeps me, Mr. Beeler works me pretty hard. So when my head hits the pillow, I'm pretty much out. But one thing that kind of consumes my thoughts during the day is, if you've heard Secretary Esper talk about the Army Renaissance and where we are as an Army, I think that's true. I think that's right. I think the Army's getting back to basics. It's about readiness. It's about focus on training and investing in the right things. So I think that's good. What worries me is the potential for shifting funding or shifting political winds to include doggone appointees that you got to put up with. I worry about the extent to which that could change the Army's focus and priorities, because I think we're on a good path. I think we've got industry, communities, and other partners on board with us, and we're moving out. We've got a good plan, even as we coalesce around the forthcoming, better look at a facilities investment strategy. I think all that's good, and we're on the right path, and I want us to be able to stay on it.
Over to you, General Ham.
Good. Well, thanks for a great first panel getting us started, despite the somewhat intimidating title. I think we did. I think we covered a wide array of subjects of great interest. It's probably bad form, but Colonel Tortora, your comment, we kind of considered the premier event to occur in 123 days as the AUSA annual meeting, 14 through 16 October. But this is, but again, great panel. I would encourage you during the break. Since we do have so many AUSA members, and thank you for that, this is a perfect opportunity to make sure that we have your record updated. So see Christine Lathrop, make sure we got your contact information and all that stuff up to date as we move forward. And let's be back here at 10:30, please, 10:30. Again, panel, great job. Thank you very much.